You checked on your kids' group chat this morning, not because something happened, just to make sure nothing did. Meanwhile, your parents didn't know where you were half of Saturday, and somehow you turned out fine. So here's the question nobody wants to ask out loud. What if the thing you're doing right now, the thing that feels like love, is the exact reason your kid falls apart the first time life doesn't go their way? Here's a question for you. When's the last time your kid solved a real problem completely alone? No group chat, no you stepping in, no adults smoothing it over before it even became a problem. Take your time. A lot of parents watching this can't actually answer that. Because somewhere in the last 30 years, protecting your kid quietly turned into preventing your kid from ever needing to cope. You grew up with a key around your neck. You let yourself in. You made your own snack. You argued with your siblings and nobody mediated it. Nobody was coming. That wasn't neglect. By 1980, over 22% of American marriages were ending in divorce, nearly double the rate from a decade earlier. And millions of kids came home to an empty house because both parents, married or not, were working. You didn't choose independence. It was handed to you at 8 years old, whether you were ready or not. Now flip to today. A manager in Indiana taped a sign to his shop door last year after 2 teenage employees quit rather than stand for a full shift. A hiring executive went viral for describing a young job candidate who turned down a task because, in his words, it looked like a lot of work. These aren't isolated internet clips anymore. They're becoming a pattern, and Gen X parents are starting to wonder quietly if they built that pattern themselves. Let's actually build the case, because this isn't a vibe, it's a documented shift, and it happened on your watch. In the 90s, youth sports started handing out a trophy for showing up, not for winning, for existing. It wasn't new. Kids got participation medals as far back as the 1920s. But in the 90s, it exploded, riding a wave of self-esteem movement thinking that swept through American parenting and education. California even ran a state task force in the late 80s built entirely around boosting kids' self-esteem, regardless of whether they'd actually earned it. The idea was simple and well-meaning. If a kid feels good about themselves, they'll succeed. Nobody checked what happens when feeling good gets fully unhooked from actually being good at something. Then came the term for what a lot of you are doing without even noticing. Snowplow parenting. Not helicopter. Helicopter parents hover and swoop in after something goes wrong. Snowplow parents get there first. They clear the obstacle before their kid even knows it existed. One psychologist put it plainly, parents have become so determined to make life smooth for their kids that they're removing the very challenges that build resilience. That's not an insult. That's a diagnosis, and it's aimed at people who love their kids more than any generation before them. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Pediatric researchers describe children as antifragile, like a muscle or an immune system. They don't just survive stress, they need it in the right doses to develop it all. A tree that never faces wind grows a weak root system. It looks fine in a still yard. The first real storm takes it down. Psychologists studying this are now saying it plainly. The overprotection isn't just failing to help. It's actively removing the thing your kid's nervous system needs most. And you already half know this, don't you? You felt a flinch of guilt when you overheard your own voice narrating your kid's argument with a friend instead of letting them figure it out. That flinch is the whole video. Sit with it, because in the next 6 minutes, it gets worse before it gets better. Okay, deep breath, because now I'm going to say the thing this video was never actually about. And it's going to feel like the floor drops out. It's not your kid's fault. Say that again in your head. It's not your kid's fault. Somewhere in the last 20 minutes, you've probably been quietly building a case against your own child. Soft, entitled, can't take a hit. But a Gen Z workplace researcher put it in a way that should stop you cold. Every single generation gets accused of this. Millennials got hammered for needing participation trophies and can't handle a real job. Before them, it was Gen X. Remember being called slackers, cynical, checked out? A career columnist who spent years untangling workplace complaints said it flat out. When people are new and inexperienced, of course they look inexperienced. That's not a generational flaw. That's just what being new looks like every single time in every generation that has ever existed. So if it's not a flaw in your kid, and it's not a flaw unique to this era, then where did the softness actually come from? I think you already know. I think you've known since the cold open of this video. It came from the same place love always comes from. You trying to protect them from something you didn't have protection from yourself. Let that sit for a second. Actually sit in it. Don't scroll past it. You are not a bad parent. You are a parent who grew up with almost no supervision, no safety net, and in a lot of cases, real instability. And you swore somewhere around age 9 or 10, alone in that empty house, that your own kid would never feel what you felt. That's not weakness. That's one of the most human instincts there is. The problem was never the love. The problem is that the love got translated into a strategy. Remove every obstacle. Instead of the strategy your parents' generation used by accident. Leave the kid alone long enough that they had no choice but to build the muscle. A child psychologist studying this exact pattern says the parents most likely to snowplow aren't cold or checked out. It's often rooted in their own anxiety, not their kid's need. Read that again. Your kid's softness might not even be about your kid. It might be a mirror. Here's where it gets personal, so buckle up. Think about the last time your kid came to you upset. A friend group drama, a bad grade, a coach who benched them. What did you actually do? Did you ask what they were going to do about it? Or did you already have your phone out, already drafting the text to the other parent, the teacher, the coach, already clearing the path before your kid took a single step down it? I'm not asking to shame you. I'm asking because somewhere in America right now, a 10-year-old is learning that every hard feeling gets absorbed by someone else before it reaches them. And one day, maybe at 19, maybe at 25, sitting in a job interview or a lease signing or a breakup, there will be no parent standing between them and the obstacle. And in that moment, for the first time in their entire life, they will have to feel something all the way through alone. That's the moment this entire video has been building toward. And it terrifies you, doesn't it? Because you already know exactly which moment I mean. You've already pictured it. So let's talk about what happens on the other side of that moment. Because the data isn't gentle. In 2013, about 30% of high schoolers reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. By 2021, that number had climbed to 42%. That's not a blip, that's a 10-point jump in under a decade in the generation that grew up the most protected, the most supervised, and the most anxious in recorded history. Gallup found that nearly half of Gen Z, 47%, say they often or always feel anxious. Compare that to 13% of Gen X reporting their own mental health as fair or poor, versus 27% of Gen Z saying the same thing about themselves. Right now, at the exact age when you were figuring out how to ride a city bus alone. Researcher Jonathan Haidt, who spent over 5 years on this exact question, lands on a phrase that should haunt every parent watching this. The great rewiring of childhood. Not because kids got worse, because childhood itself got restructured. Less unsupervised play, less real risk, less practice feeling scared and finding out you survive it. Replaced by supervision so constant that a whole generation reached adulthood, having almost never sat alone with a hard feeling before. And here's the part that's genuinely sad, not just uncomfortable. You did this out of grief. Grief for the childhood you had to survive without anyone catching you. You didn't get therapy language for it. You didn't get a name for what it felt like coming home to an empty house at 8 years old and making your own dinner because both parents were working or gone or fighting. You just called it Tuesday. So when you had kids of your own, you weren't trying to raise soft kids. You were trying to give your own inner 8-year-old the thing nobody gave them, someone who shows up. And it worked in a way. Your kid has never once come home to an empty house wondering if anyone's coming. But grief has a way of overcorrecting. You gave them the opposite of your childhood so completely that you may have taken away the one thing your hardest years actually built in you. The knowledge, bone deep, that you can survive being alone with a problem. That's the trade nobody warned you about. Presence for resilience. And you didn't even know you were making it. Okay, breathe. Because here's some good news. This is fixable. Kids are resilient. Researchers keep confirming that even kids raised this way can build the muscle back. And it's genuinely not too late. Except it isn't quite that simple, is it? Because you can't just flip a switch tomorrow and hand your 14-year-old total independence after 14 years of clearing every path. The resilience-building window narrows every year you wait. The habits are on both sides now, yours and theirs. Your kid has spent a decade learning that discomfort gets solved by someone else, and unlearning that isn't a weekend project. It's a slow, awkward, uncomfortable process, and you're going to have to sit with your own anxiety while you do it, because the urge to swoop back and will not disappear just because you read an article about it. So no, there's no easy fix waiting right now, but there is a real one, and it starts with understanding exactly how we all got here in the first place. Here's the truth. You didn't do this in a vacuum. An entire culture built the snowplow for you and handed you the keys. Think about the 90s and 2000s news cycle you raised your kids inside. Stranger danger became a household phrase, even though child abduction by strangers was, and still is, statistically one of the rarest things that can happen to a kid. But rare doesn't mean it didn't dominate the evening news, and fear doesn't run on statistics. It runs on stories. Parents in Maryland got investigated for letting a 10-year-old walk home from a park. A mother in Virginia had police called on her because her 8-year-old walked home alone. By 2018, Utah had to pass an actual law, the first of its kind, just to make it legal again for a kid to walk to school unsupervised without their parent risking a neglect charge. Think about that. An entire state legislature had to write a bill to give back something your childhood had by default. Layer on to that the self-esteem movement of the 80s and 90s, the participation trophies, the rise of 24-hour cable news cycles built to keep you afraid, and later, smartphones that let you track your kid's location in real time. And overprotection stopped being a choice. It became the water you were swimming in. You weren't a worse parent than your own parents. You were parenting inside a completely different set of pressures, most of which were manufactured by fear, not by any real increase in danger. And here's where I owe you the fair version of this story, because it's too easy to end this on a clean villain. And there isn't one. Talk to actual Gen Z workers, and you'll hear a different account of the same facts. They'll tell you they're not fragile. They're just the first generation to ask, out loud, for feedback that doesn't sit in a drawer for 6 months before anyone mentions it. One workplace expert who spent years untangling generational complaints put it bluntly. This exact soft generation panic got said about millennials, and it turned out to be mostly noise. It got said about you too. Gen X was called slackers and checked out before anyone called Gen Z soft. Every generation that grows up gets accused of being the fragile one by the generation that had to survive without a safety net. That doesn't make what you're feeling wrong. It means you're standing inside a pattern that's older than either of you. So here's the pinch. The softness you're seeing might be real, and the parenting shift you made might be real. And it's also true that some of what feels like weakness in your kid is actually them asking for something your generation never got to ask for, to be treated like a whole person instead of toughened up through neglect. Both things can be true. You can regret overprotecting and still be raising a kid who in some ways is doing something braver than you ever got the chance to, asking for what they need instead of burying it. So if it's not really about blame, not on you, not on them, then the only useful question left is, what do you actually do with what you now know? Because here's the thing that should feel like relief instead of dread. The same research that diagnosed the problem also mapped the way out. Kids don't need trauma to build resilience. They need small, repeated doses of manageable difficulty, a hard conversation you don't have for them, a mistake you let them make and clean up themselves, a walk to the corner store without a location pin. The muscle rebuilds. It's slower than the muscle that builds in childhood by accident, but it rebuilds. That's not a guess. That's what the same antifragile research says works at every age. You're not too late. You're just at the part of the story where the thing you learned by accident at 8 years old becomes the thing you now have to teach on purpose. Let's get concrete, because a feeling without an action is just a guilt trip, and that's not what this video is for. Start absurdly small. Let your kid handle one uncomfortable conversation this week without you stepping in first, ordering their own food wrong and having to fix it, emailing a teacher themselves, calling to reschedule their own appointment. It will feel unnatural. You will want to grab the phone. Don't. Utah's free-range parenting law exists because enough parents fought for the basic right to let a kid walk to the store alone. You don't need a law to give your own kid that back. You just need to notice the reflex to clear the path, and for one moment, let the obstacle stay exactly where it is. Second, separate your anxiety from their actual risk. Ask yourself honestly, am I stepping in because this is dangerous or because I can't stand watching them struggle? Those are two completely different problems, and only one of them is about your kid. Third, and this is the one most parents skip, talk to your kid directly about this, out loud. Tell them you're trying to hand back some of the hard stuff on purpose, not because you stop caring, but because you finally understand what caring is supposed to build in them. Remember the question from the very beginning of this video? When's the last time your kid solved a real problem completely alone? Here's your answer, and it's not a failure. It's a starting line. You weren't handed independence because your parents were wise. You were handed it because nobody was home. Your kid doesn't have to learn resilience the way you did, through absence. They can learn it the way you're about to teach it. On purpose, with you standing close enough to catch them if it actually goes wrong, but far enough away that they have to try first. That's the whole difference between the childhood you survived and the one you get to build for them now. Not more distance, better timing. If any part of this hit close to home, if you caught yourself flinching at the phone or the sign or the empty kitchen table, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. What's one thing you're going to let your kid handle alone this week? Not perfectly, not without worrying, just alone. And if you're a Gen Zer who grew up with that key around your neck, tell that story too. Not for sympathy, for the record, because your kid should know exactly what built the parent standing in front of them. Subscribe if you want the next one, because this conversation doesn't end with one video, and neither does the work. You didn't fail. You just loved out loud in the only language you had. Now you get to learn a new one together.